It's your boy, Marcus McGhee's Alice, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC at the Apex. Why are there so many names here? We talked about it on the preview, but this was very strong for an Apex card, on at least who was on it. It did have a main event that on paper made you roll your eyes, and in actuality, you know, it was impressive, but also kind of like, But the number of known fighters on this card was very unusual for an Apex filler. Most people suspect because eyes are on the UFC this week, ahead of UFC White House next week. Certainly Dana White's doing a lot of media at the moment and not having a great time. It's always funny seeing him on something where it's not just an influencer who's been given a UFC press credential on the understanding that they won't rock the boat at all. The moment anyone questions him about something he vaguely doesn't like, he just melts down. He's very out of practice at talking to people who aren't just there to suck his dick. But if people did think, oh, what's this MMA stuff about? What's this UFC stuff? The sport of UFC, what's it about? And they tuned in for this one. They got some finishes. They got some fun stuff if they came for the prelims. If they came for the main card, then, you know, it was a bit hit and miss. But let's start with the main event. Gabriel Bonfim versus Belal Muhammad. Third in a row for the Belal Muhammad skid. And there's this welterweight curse where when you lose the welterweight title, you fall off a cliff. And obviously there's been some really rough ones over recent years. Tyron Woodley's probably still the gold standard. Because before Tyron Woodley fought Kamaru Usman, there was a conversation about how he was close to catching up to Georges St-Pierre. He's going to be one of the best of all time if he keeps this up. Lost to Kamaru Usman. Lost to Gilbert Burns during the pandemic. Lost a load more fights. Didn't win one before getting knocked out in the boxing ring by Jake Paul. And now Tyron Woodley's whole thing is when an influencer boxing fight is close to falling through, he's like, I'm there, I'm flying there now, sign me to fight. And they don't. That was probably the saddest fall off, but obviously Jack Della Maddalena just fought again and lost after losing the title. The champion before him was Belal Muhammad, who fought Ian Gary afterwards and lost, and then this fight just now. Leon Edwards is on a rough streak since losing to Belal Muhammad. And Kamaru Usman just got his first win back in June since losing the belt. He did have that fairly competitive fight against Khamzat Chimaev, which, you know, helps the theory that he's not completely washed. But it has been, like, you can't just lose the welterweight title and then be like, but I'm still number 2 guy. You have to lose your next fight as well, it seems. My title this week is probably going to be something about Gabriel Bonfim beating Belal and taking his title as most generic fighter, but he is pretty generic. You know, we all remember the terrible game plan against Wonderboy Thompson and then the really good game plan in his next fight against Randy Brown. This one he came out and he really did look like he had the right idea all the way through. It's kind of interesting because like his first fights in the UFC, like the Lazares, Trevin Giles fight, Nicholas Dalby, the one that he lost famously, he does just look like he's in there sort of playing around and seeing what he wants to do. In his last 2 fights, Randy Brown and this one, I've really been impressed by his focus and his emphasis on doing what he needs to do right then against this particular opponent. We were talking about this with Ian Gary, the last guy who beat Belal, saying like, not a lot of, you can't look at Ian Gary and go, that one thing about Ian Gary, oh, that's a problem. Everyone's going to struggle with that. What Ian Gary has that's quite special is that he's got very generic skills. He's like a creator fighter on a UFC game who hasn't unlocked any of the cool moves, but he can use them in the right ways, move the sliders around, as we say, to bring out the worst of the opponent. The very rare fighter with answers rather than just a hard question. And Bonfim's last 2 fights, I've been quite impressed with him doing the same thing. There was not a lot in this fight where you were like, damn, who can deal with that technique X, skill X? But it's not a case of who can deal with it, because he was only fighting Belal, so Belal had to deal with it and he couldn't. You know, it was a jab, a low kick, and a left hook. That was it, for the most part. Now, those are the building blocks of a solid fighter, just generally. But he got the read on Belal, and Belal was never able to switch it up and get out of the rut. In the Ian Gary fight, Belal struggled to push him back. He struggled to close the distance. He was being stopped by good footwork, a nice jab, lovely oblique kick that Ian Gary only really used for that fight, just to slam him in the knee, to stop him coming forward too fast. And he ended up sort of staring at Ian Gary out in the middle of the cage. This fight, he was on the back foot with his back foot against the cage almost from the very beginning. And I've got in my notes here, round 4 actually starts crowding Bonfim with 1 minute left, gets to the middle of the cage. That's how long it took him to get on offense. You know, we talked about this last week. It was a big theme. It's been a theme in my work since like the very beginning, and whenever I started 2012, 2013, Ringcraft. But it's especially obvious when Belal Muhammad is a guy who his best takedowns come along the fence. So when he fought Leon Edwards is he's a good mover, but he is very lackadaisical. He will only move as much as he needs to, which is a good thing in some senses. You don't want people just jumping around like loons, pretending to be Dominic Cruz. But I likened him to like the descriptions of endurance hunting, where a human being can jog for long periods, but every other animal will sprint away, then sit down, and then you catch up to it and it'll sprint away and sit down again. And that's how Leon Edwards fights. So Belal was able to give him a horrible time by like walking up to him constantly, just putting him under pressure. And then when he did shoot, it was straight into the cage, hands locked under the butt, pull his legs out, put him on his back. The hands locked double is still a really strong takedown. From the fence, that is. Because if the guy's standing against the fence, like he can't sprawl his legs further back than his head and his shoulders because he's flat up against the fence. So if you get your hands locked under his butt, you put your head against him or your shoulder against him and pull your hands towards you, he can't sprawl out of it. He's just stuck straight. That was Greg Jackson's plan for just like getting his hundreds and hundreds of fighters through the regional scene. If you were a regional fighter in the New Mexico area in the early 2000s, you were getting locked hands doubled by one of Greg Jackson's boys. But it works because the fence is behind the other guy. The moment that your back is to the fence, the opponent has the largest possible distance between his back and the fence in the other direction. So unless you do something real clever where you duck in under one of his punches and you turn him onto the fence behind you, you got problems. And I mentioned this a while ago when I was talking about Raymond Muratalia on the Boycast. He's a boxer. I think he's the IBF champion at the moment, but very slick operator. Fights aggressively, but the moment you come back at him, he'll give you a step. He'll step back into the center of the ring. And then he'll come forward again. And the whole thing is that if you are just lashing out back at him, he'll let you go. He'll go, no, I don't want to really get tied up with that. And so many of his opponents get in this habit where they throw back and then they stop and then they get put on the back foot again. And this is what happened with Belal here. And the great thing about having your opponent's back to the cage is that you have all the distance in the world to back up. So unless he's really committing, backing up on a straight line is one of the cardinal sins in boxing and in fighting generally. But, you can take 2 steps back quite comfortably and make a lot of distance if you know that you're the furthest distance possible from the opposite ropes or cage. The problems are if you're in the middle of the ring and then you start backing up on a straight line, you're going to hit the ropes pretty quickly, which is a whole different thing. Like a good amateur boxer is often taught to gauge his distance from the ropes behind him by looking at the ropes in front of him. Because you can't, and I say you can't because I've seen guys do this in MMA, you can't look behind you to see how close you are to the fence or ropes. I've literally seen guys do that, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone knocked out for it, but I've been screaming at the TV when it's happened. So cage position was a huge deal, but the other thing was, and this is true of both Belal Muhammad in this fight and then the opponents of Raymond Muratalia I talked about earlier, if you know that when you come off the fence, they're going to step back, you've got to say, I can't come off the fence and then go back into defense mode. Because what Belal was doing throughout this fight, he made a good read early. He made the read that Bonfim was going to slap at his jab and then try and throw the left hook. And he went into like a side-on horse stance to throw the left hook. He really wanted to take Belal's head off, or at least make him worry about it. And the way he was reaching out for the jab, I was like, well, something could slot behind that, but you've got to then make the pressure to get that. It's like Sean Strickland. You can't jab, body jab, body jab, and then try and leap in with the left hook and just hope that you get him because the left hook's shorter. What you've got to do is what Pereira did and Imavov did a little bit in the first round. You've got to bring him to you so that he's reaching forwards. So he's reaching out and moving forwards. Then he can jump in and he'll just be straight on top of the left hook with no guard for it. But Belal made that read. And he came off the fence with a 3-2, a left hook right straight. And Bonfim was like, oh, yeah, you got close that time. But he just backed up and it fell short. And then Belal backed off to the fence again. And then he'd come off with it again and go back to the fence and come off with it again. You've got to go, right, attack, stay here, attack again. And that's the scary part because particularly in these kickboxing-centric fights, fighters will get into the tit-for-tat exchanges. And particularly if you're losing, it's a lot easier to go, right, here's some punches, and they back off. And that's a nice feeling. You get a little break, and then you go, right, back on defense. Because if you go forward again, you know you're very vulnerable to getting hit on the return. It allows a fighter to sort of do just enough, and when really they need to be pushing it and making stuff happen. And the risk is that they're going to, well, not the risk, the guarantee is you're going to get hit on the counter if you're moving forward. But you've got to make it happen. And that was the story of this fight. Belal would come off the fence with one attack or one combination, two punches and maybe a left high kick, which again was a good read, trying to sneak it behind the reaching right hand of Bonfim. But all Bonfim had to do was back off and then go, right, now I know I can pressure him right back to the fence. He's going to give ground immediately. He's not going to stand and trade with me. Because that's absolutely not what Belal wanted to do. Belal was in that mindset of like, his go, my go, his go, my go. I hope I can knock him out on my go. When what you need to be doing is going, like, that's my go, and now he's coming back, so I'm going to break him off right there. And the other reason that's important is, even though Belal was at a massive power disadvantage, he did land a couple of punches that made Bonfim back up a bit. I think that was the fourth round when he finally got the pressure going. It was because he'd cracked Bonfim with a decent punch. He's not incapable of hurting people, but obviously Bonfim had the power advantage in this fight, it seemed. But by attacking and then attacking again, you can actually eat up that distance and get the guy back in towards the fence. Bonfim is not like a brilliant ring general. I've not seen him circling off the fence beautifully. In fact, I was watching his fight with Angalusa and he just got run onto the fence quite a few times. But because he's put so much distance between his back and the opposite fence, he's got an awful lot of room to make mistakes and for you to give up. You got to put that pressure on, and that pressure has to be attack, break, not attack, retreat, his turn. So I'm done hammering that point into the ground now, but like, because he could never put two attacks together back to back, because he would never accept a trade with Bonfim, Belal could never really come forward except for like a minute in the fourth round, which happened because he finally managed to land on Bonfim, and Bonfim went, oh, okay, right, I'm having a couple of backward steps now. And then, before the end of the fourth round even, it was the last minute of the fourth round he got going forwards, and before the end of the fourth round he was on the back foot again. I got in my notes, gets banged back into passivity. The other thing was that Belal's striking and wrestling mixing together was what got him to the dance. That's what won him all those fights. Being able to go up, down, and you did see a couple of like jabs into right body straight here, but the first time he level changed onto a legitimate shot was running at Bonfim at the start of the third round, and then later in the third round he finally mixed a level change into his striking legitimately. I get that Bonfim's a big strong guy and trying to wrestle him, particularly not on your terms, because Belal wants to shoot into the fence. He doesn't want to shoot into space. If you watch his fight with Leon, every time he shoots onto the fence, he gets Leon down or he gets the high crotch and dumps Leon on his head. Every time he shoots out in the open, Leon sprawls. But you got to get out there and just level change, slap the leg. Level change, grab the leg half-arsedly. You've got to be able to do that to actually make the level changes in the striking work. And he didn't. He worked out that he could do some decent work with a southpaw body kick, so he's switching to southpaw. Well, anytime he tried to switch in the attack, Bonfim would stand there and hit him, because he worked out what was happening. It worked better when Belal would circle the cage a little bit and change stances and then kick. Anytime he tried to hide it, Bonfim was just like, no, stood still. There was one in the third round, I think, where Belal tries to do the Carlos Condit step through weave high kick, and it works on the guy giving ground. Think of the one that Condit did to George St. Pierre. You pump hands, you weave, you step through, and you throw the high kick off the left leg, and you catch them like on the end of your foot. And because Bonfim didn't move, Belal sort of ran into him and then got left hooked. Which is, that's something I bang on about in MMA all the time. Not reading the guy when you want to shift. Stepping through and changing stances, doing a big move that covers a load of distance when the guy's just standing there. Because you just run onto them with your feet level, and then you get chinned and fall over, even if you're not particularly hurt. Loved what Bonfim was doing with the calf kick, and the calf kick into the left hook especially. We were talking about that with Cub Swanson when he retired, the idea of the short, low kick, long left hook. Because it's very hard, even if you could knock the guy off balance, it's very hard to get in with that left hook before they get their feet down and start defending themselves. And he was doing it over and over again. So, using our new format, or our old format that I got away from for a long time, but what could Belal have done to win? Well, I mean, we didn't even really see much of Bonfim having to defend Belal's best work, because Belal's best work comes along the fence. And while I'm hammering this a lot, like, there are people who have fought Belal and chosen to stand by the fence. Diego Lima fought him, and his whole style, like Douglas Lima, is to stand by the fence. And then you go, well, that was, you just played into Belal's game plan, and you didn't get a second of offense going because he was able to just go up, and drop on your hips. So just by frightening him a little bit in the first seconds of the fight and walking at him, Bonfim saved himself all the trouble of having to defend the takedowns and try and fight off the fence. But for Belal, lack of urgency on the fence, if you're on the fence, it happens. It's not the end of the world. It's a bad spot. You're in danger. And the longer you spend on the fence circling around, think of Figgy last week against Yadong, the longer you spend on the fence circling around, the more of the fight you are in danger / not in a position to really effectively do any offense. I'm not saying the guy can't come in with loading up his punches and you duck and chin him and he gets knocked out. Like, that's totally possible, and it happens all the time in the regional scene. But if you want to attack him, he can drop back into the center of the cage. If you want to kick him, he can drop back into the center of the cage, or he can eat the kick and run you into the fence. He can run you into the fence at basically any opportunity he wants to. And if you want to shoot a takedown or something like that, you've got miles where he's going to sprawl before you hit the cage. So more urgency along the fence, moving. And the other thing, the big thing for me, is that I like a fighter who abandons their stance near the fence, more so for MMA than for boxing or kickboxing. And this is one of those things that there's two schools of thought on. If you keep your stance, you can move in your stance and try and make angles that way and get out. But if you flatten your stance out, so you draw your lead foot back to level with your rear foot, so you're just standing with your feet level, and your hands up by your chin or your head, obviously, you can now do side steps in the sporting sense. Like when you're out on the playing field, you can step to your left, step to your right, and you can fake and juke and change direction. So the king of this, and I wrote an article called Willie Pep Advanced Striking 2.0, specifically about this athletic form of sidestepping versus the classical boxing form of sidestepping. Yeah, Willie Pep, go watch him. Every time he gets near the ropes, his feet level out, he fakes one way, goes the other. Or he fakes both ways and goes back the first way. Or he goes one way and waits for the guy to leap at him and ducks under the punch. He was phenomenal. And if you want to see it in MMA, Israel Adesanya, Dominic Cruz all the time. Go watch his WEC fights. It's just guys walking up to him and try to swing on him. And he changes direction and dances off the fence. Eddie Alvarez, when he was in trouble, when he was hurt, was very good at this. But the other thing about leveling out your feet like that, abandoning your stance, is it makes it harder to low kick you without stepping really deep and trying to trap you against the fence. What Bonfim was able to do throughout this fight was just kick that lead leg, because Belal's absolutely convinced that his game is boxing into takedowns, or just boxing nowadays, and he's standing with the lead leg just out there to be punted all the time. If you pull that back into your stance and you dance around a bit and then you drop into your stance when you want to attack, so you can either just step in and then step again, like you step your left foot forward and then you step from your stance, or you can do a little drop step or a split step, which is where you just jump both feet. So your right foot goes back and your left foot goes forward, and then you attack. And those are both very legitimate techniques that you can see all over the place in combat sports. But then you've taken away the problem of the low kick for the most part, and you're addressing the problem of the cage position. I'm not saying you learn that overnight. I'm just saying it would have been a lot better than what Belal was doing. And he's capable of doing that. Like, if they'd spent the camp just saying, right, we're leaving our stance and circling, we're changing direction along the fence, and we're dropping back into our stance when we want to attack. But that's just talking Bonfim as an opponent specifically. Belal Muhammad, every fighter, should know how to get off the fence when they're stuck there. And so many don't. And the key is level out your stance and do direction changes. You fake one way, you go the other. I'm still watching UFC level fights where the guy on the fence tries to punch his way off. And sometimes it works, so shame on the opponent as well. What's next for the winner? Gabriel Bonfim, only one loss in the UFC against Nicolas Dalby. He's on a great little run. He was ranked at number 11 coming in. Belal was ranked at number 5. Who's interesting for Bonfim? I mean, next to him in the rankings is Amasov, who I don't know if he's booked at the moment. The fun way to do this is, like, stylistically, who's a difficult matchup? Stylistically, who's a matchup who might show Gabriel Bonfim in his best light? And then who is the best ranked opponent who he would have a good time fighting? So good opponents for him. I suppose you say anyone, like all the old boys. He's just beaten Belal Muhammad at number 5, but Kamaru Usman's still at number 8. though Usman is supposed to be, he's rumoured to be fighting DDP at middleweight for some reason. I don't know if it does a lot for Bonfim to fight down the rankings now, because Rodriguez is still ranked. He'd probably have a great time against Medic, because he's a decently strong striker and he's also a pretty good grappler on his own terms. Buckley's ranked at 9, and Buckley basically only fought washed old men, or only beat washed old men, and then lost to a washed old man in his last one. Buckley is a great one for anyone who is a long, competent striker, because he'll make them look very good. Sean Brady's at 6, and I still haven't got the full read on Sean Brady, because that could be a horrible matchup for Bonfim. Angalusa got him down 4 times. I think Dalby got him down once on his terms. But then Sean Brady got the treatment that Gabriel Bonfim just gave Belal Muhammad from Belal Muhammad. So that's how bad Sean Brady's striking is. If you actually get him backing up, Belal Muhammad can bully him. Jack Della Maddalena, that would be a rough one for Jack Della Maddalena to take immediately off a really hard loss there. Michael Morales, Carlos Prates, Ian Machado. Do you know what? And then Makhachev's the champ. Do you know what? Morales and Prates really interest me there, because you got two very, I don't want to say one-dimensional, but very one dimension of the fight, heavy fighters. Morales has excelled against grapplers, basically, because he's amazing at stopping takedowns and hits really hard. He's not a great technical striker. Meanwhile, Carlos Prates is really lethal on the feet. But through good footwork, repeated use of the high kick, level changes, Ian Machado Gary made him look pretty bad. You can keep going on about like the last minute of that fight, but 24 minutes of that fight was Ian Machado Gary taking Carlos Prates to school. I think that game plan could be pretty replicable for Bonfim, who's shown he's a pretty adaptable fighter. The Morales fight intrigues me because that would easily be the most competent striker that Morales has fought. Aside from that, it's maybe Trevin Giles. Gilbert Burns hits hard, but was completely washed by the time he fought Michael Morales, and really never got past hitting hard as his main thing on the feet. McGhee has a jab, but again, it's McGhee. He really does need the takedown for it to work. Went the decision with Jake Matthews, and that was sort of before Jake Matthews had his little career resurgence. He got to round 3 with Adam Fuggett, who's just asking to be knocked out in a lot of his fights. So there you go. I would like that one. I would like Michael Morales versus Gabriel Bonfim, please, while they do, I think it's Gary versus Makhachev that's heavily rumoured at the moment. Does leave Carlos Prates with nothing to do, though. Hardest matchup for Bonfim. There are people I'd love to see Makhachev fight. I'd love to see him fight Morales just for the freak athlete with heavy hands against a smaller, wrestling-reliant but very competent technician on the feet. I think there's a lot of compelling stuff to that matchup, even if I don't think Michael Morales is the most skilled fighter. But I think Islam Makhachev is a rough ask for Gabriel Bonfim, just on having a lot of layers that would have protected Belal in this match, because Belal couldn't get to his strength at all here. Islam Makhachev has good ring craft, good striking, great kicking game, decent power even up at welterweight, and the awareness to not just get put on the fence over and over. And actually, if he's on the fence, he's been pulling people in by the double collar tie and then grabbing the overhook and trying to throw them off with his back on the fence. So yeah, he obviously generational talent, but I could see him being a very rough ask for Bonfim. Michael Page has not been seen in a while, but I would be fascinated to see him against Bonfim. I say fascinated, I would be like, oh, I have to watch this. Damn. But the fact that he's so seldom in range to be hit with a counter left hook, the fact that every time Belal came in, it was the counter left hook, I think someone with the reads and the feints of Michael Page could take advantage of that. He could keep the exchanges to a minimum, and a lot of Gabriel Bonfim's takedowns when he's wanted them have been by getting guys into exchanges. And those exchanges just don't happen for Michael Page. Oh, Amosov, that's another good fight, actually, because Amosov, I would say they're both decently rounded fighters who bring a rounded threat. They're not specialists like Prates and Morales. But I would say Bonfim can crack and Amosov cannot. But Amosov can force the fence wrestling in a way that Bonfim often doesn't or hasn't. And I've also been impressed with Amosov both on the bottom and when fighting off a single leg out in the open. If you watch his fight with Logan Storley, every time Logan Storley tries to grab him, he's in danger. But then Bonfim has that wicked guillotine too, so I think that's a matchup where spiritually they're quite similar fighters, but in the nitty-gritty details, they're very different. And what's next for Belal? Take a step down, mate. Yeah, because it's... I don't know if they like Belal, because they keep getting him on... he's good friends with John Anik, and he appears on lots of podcasts that are UFC state TV. But, you got the sense when he won the belt, they didn't like having him as the champion, because he's a very... Even at his best, he was never the most exciting fighter. They could want him to go out like Tyron Woodley. For Belal, you'd love to see him fight someone like Mike Malott, which would instantly be a headliner in Canada, and therefore a terrible headliner. But I could see him beating Mike Malott quite handily. But then they seem to want Mike Malott to actually get some wins now, so probably not making that fight. Maybe it's a risky one, but maybe Medic, because you could get horribly laid out there. Particularly because I've just watched him walk on to 100 left hooks by Bonfim, and Medic actually seems to have the one puff stuff when he's intercepting people. But equally, who have I seen Medic in with who will put him under pressure? Oralby, who finished him in round 2. So, yeah, that's a winnable fight for Belal. Again, if he gets to the pressure. So what else was happening on this card? Co-main event was Brendan Allen versus Edmund Shahbayzyan. I'll be honest, fellas, this did not... give me wowzers in my trousers. I respect that Brendan Allen was doing good striking against a guy who was supposed to be a better striker than him, but I'm watching Edmund Shahbayzyan strike, and it's like, clearly he was a teenager who had a wicked fast jab and was very explosive. But now he's not. He's not a teenager anymore. He's standing in front of guys, not moving, and then popping out a very fast jab, a respectable jab, but then getting hit on the return because he's not moving his head. In fighting, everyone's always talking about rhythm and long rhythms and short rhythms and stuff. But I'm watching this fight and going, just take a walk around the cage, mate. Because they're standing right in front of each other, staring. And then Edmund will either get his jab countered or jab and then get hit afterwards. It's like, yes, throw first, land first is always great. Beating a guy to the punch is great. But it isn't the be-all and end-all of fighting. I just don't think he's explosive and youthful enough anymore to get through just doing that. If he just moved around a little bit and made Allen turn, he would be able to sneak these punches in easier. If he moved his head at all, not only just does that make it harder to see when he's going to jab, but it also means that after he's jabbed, he might not get domed with the right hand across the top. This fight was just like, I'm watching a guy with a impressive physical talent, even as he's aging, and going, why has no one taught you? Why has no one been there with the pool noodles going bang, bang, and hitting you in the head after every jab going, why aren't you moving your head? So another Dr. Slacky prescribes 10 rounds of double end bag every day until your back is completely fucked like Mike Tyson. That's how much head movement you got to do for it to start showing in fights. What's next for winner? I don't think I need to do how would you have won that, because it was just a basic fight. But what's next for winner is Brendan Allen immediately beats an unranked contender and calls for a title fight, because it's just a Brendan Allen move. He's always saying the dumbest shit. He got out there and he was like, I think I just beat Edmund Shahbayzyan, and I think he's a better version of Sean Strickland. And I'm like, I've been very over that. I don't enjoy Strickland's style. It annoys me. There's a lot of stuff that he could do to make his style less tedious, but at no point will you hear me say that Sean Strickland is not a very good fighter. And I'm certainly not saying that he's worse than Edmund Shahbayzyan. So what's next for both? Cut them both. Tom Nolan versus Ziam. This one was really intriguing to me coming in. I did a little video about Ziam, showing him like hoisting midgets into the air, because he's 6'1", allegedly. We got into this last week. I said these have got to be self-reported, because you see them in the cage and they're not anywhere close to what they're supposed to be. Like, Ziam is supposed to be 6'1", and Mike Davis is supposed to be 5'10". And then you saw them next to each other in the cage, and one was like half a foot taller. But this was intriguing because Ziam, his defense striking-wise, his height has insulated him a lot. And sometimes when you see tall guys fight other tall guys, they just look like shit. And there was a lot of that for the first 2 rounds of this. But more than that, like, his big move that has really won him a lot of fights lately is he gets guys to the cage, gets in the over-under clinch, he leans down on their elbow, on the underhook, and then he grabs between their legs. Then he puts his knee in and he stands up and lifts them by the crotch. And because he's so tall, when he just lifts them and his hands are down by his hips, they're floating in the air. They can't touch the floor. But then there was a clip of him doing it against Jai Herbert, where Herbert is like nowhere near as badly influenced. He comes up onto tippy toes and Ziam can't get him down. And Jai Herbert's like 6 foot. Well, I'm saying these heights like they're legitimate. They're not. They're just like, Tom Nolan was supposed to be 2 inches taller and they look like the same size. But you saw it. Ziam tried to pick him up in the first round and didn't even get him off the floor. And in the third round, he finally did move him and trip him in the way that Khabib always has to, because he's the same size as his opponents. But yeah, go watch that video. It was fun. But yeah, it was Ziam's. I thought Ziam's striking looked better than I expected it to, actually. I said last week that his striking's pretty mid, or was when I watched it, and someone was like, he had a fight in Glory. It's like he drew against another unnamed Frenchman in Glory once. That was his only fight there. But Tom Nolan's very wild and scrappy. I did think Ziam dealt well with the kicks, because Tom Nolan was really throwing body kicks and high kicks quite a lot. In fact, I think it was a caught kick in the first minute of the fight that started the first grappling exchange for Ziam. You saw Ziam elbowing on the breaks, which is what I wanted to see. Honestly, Tom Nolan elbows all the time in all his fights, and I didn't think he got to the elbow nearly enough in these clinch exchanges, whereas Ziam is very good at just timing an elbow on the break. Still a great killer in MMA. Leon Edwards, all his best connections are elbows on the break. There was a crazy moment in round 2, though, where Ziam tried to spinning elbow. I think it was coming out of a clinch. I don't think he does them out in the open too much, but he missed and tripped over himself and fell on his back. And then Tom Nolan, I called him a big goofy golden retriever last week, because I'm like, he wants to have fun and he's going to run through the coffee table. He's a very messy fighter, but he had the good sense to go, free top position, and then took it. So it ended up being 2 clean rounds for Nolan and then 1 round that you could have given for Ziam. But this one is quite interesting, because this is just, again, showing how physical matchups make fights, because Ziam has beaten much better fighters than Tom Nolan, and I don't expect much from Tom Nolan, to be honest. I think he's a great fun fighter. I don't think he's going to be a great performance fighter. I don't think he's going to be beating ranked opponents anytime soon. Whereas Ziam was going through some good names. It's kind of like Ziam obviously was the beneficiary of being tall and big for the weight class in those fights, but it's not just being tall and big for the weight class that won him those fights. As I think you're going to see when Tom Nolan starts back, spinning back elbowing people and getting his back taken constantly. It was quite funny, because Ziam did the Tom Nolan thing of flashy moving himself into bad position in this fight, but all of Tom Nolan's other fights in the UFC, he's been doing great, overwhelming a guy, and then been like, whoops, I've fallen on my head. So what's next for each of these guys? I mean, Ziam has been trying to get ranked for ages, and just they won't give him a ranked opponent. So going back to fighting exactly the same level of opponent, probably. I don't know if this will fuck up his career trajectory much at all, because he wasn't going anywhere. Meanwhile, Tom Nolan, obviously 11-1. You can sell that. It's Australian, so anyone that they can get on an Australian card, they love that shit. Looking at that top 10, well, in my head, I was like, those are a couple of interesting fights, and I picked out the only other Australian guys in there, or New Zealand guys. Killian Salkeld, that's a good one. Dan Hooker, that's a good one. Probably not the ones you want to do, especially if you're on a Australian card. I think Moicano sounds horrible for him, because he gives up position so much freely. I could see him knocking out Moicano, but it's just once Moicano's on top of you or in better position, you're going to have a really hard time. Paddy Pimblett's number 6. Well, Ziam was at 14, and he's sandwiched by Michael Chandler and Beneil Dariush. If they want Tom Nolan to execute either of those guys, there's probably a good chance he can do that. And then Fiziev at 11, I guess we'll see how he looks coming back in his next one, which is quite a quick turnaround from being knocked out. Bryce Mitchell versus Santiago Luna. I was quite looking forward to this one, because obviously Mitchell's come down in weight since his featherweight troubles. And Santiago Luna, I was really impressed with him last time out. The time before, not so much, but in his last one, I was like, oh, this guy's a legit prospect. And it was going to be a question of, was this too much too soon? And I think he also came in at short notice as well, didn't he? Yes, this was supposed to be Victor Henry. Oh, that would have been a good fight too. But Luna, strong wrestler, picking up the striking quite well. In his last one, he really boxed the guy up. And I keep saying, that's how you box in MMA. That's how Islam Makhachev boxes, which is when you're throwing jabs at me and so on, I'm moving my head and throwing counters. I'm moving my head and hitting the body. enjoying the full arsenal of boxing techniques. And the moment you start moving your head, I'm grabbing it with both hands and being like, oh, you've broken your posture, sorry, and trying to knee your head off. That's how Islam Makhachev plays boxing in MMA. And Luna was doing it lovely against, was it Angel Pacheco? But in this one, the question was, because Bryce Mitchell gets good mileage out of his striking, I would say. His striking set up a flawless takedown on Ilia Topuria, and he did outstrike Edson Barbosa back in the day. But he doesn't have any pop. So he gets good mileage out of what he can do. But it's always like the Chekhov's gun is that I'm going to shoot on your legs because I need the takedown. And in this one, it was the same. Like he came out, southpaw, checking the lead hand, throwing the lead leg sidekick to the opponent's lead leg, which is a great, annoying tool. Annoying tool is also Bryce Mitchell's nickname. But then he throws his left straight occasionally, which is quite nice. He's been working on it. It looks like he's got the kind of left straight where you're pulling your right shoulder back rather than throwing your left shoulder forwards. If you watch Toki Tamaru, the kickboxer, he's phenomenal for that. Trying to get as much rotation in your shoulders and hips by pulling the non-punching shoulder back. But he hit a good left hand into a level change, which, I mean, he's very good at it. He did it to Topuria, he did it to John Silva, and I think he got a successful takedown on John Silva off it too. It's a good setup he's got there. And it works because no matter how unthreatening his striking is, he gets his left hand on your nose so that you know that there's a left hand coming. And then the next time he throws it, he can get in legitimately without you being like, I know that's not a real left hand. So he gets his entry, he gets pulled up into the over-under, and then Santiago Luna turns him onto the fence, tries a power twist, ends up in like a dogfight position, and Bryce Mitchell sort of runs him over from the knees and ends up on top. And that was when it started getting bad for Luna, because you were like, oh, there's your strong wrestling advantage gone. You're on your back. The Bryce Mitchell top game is like everything I criticize Umar Nurmagomedov for, in that he doesn't strike at all for the most part, but keeping his head low, trying to grind his way forwards. Good guard passing in this fight on display throughout. What I did like was that he starts doing a knee cut with the underhook. He starts doing a knee cut, and then he turns his knee back the other way and tries to mount, but with the opponent holding onto his foot with their thighs, because that puts you in what's called 3/4 mount, which is where he sets up the like twister, the Dagestani handcuff, that whole series of stuff that he was doing in those early UFC fights where everyone was like, oh my God, how do you even escape that chain of attacks? And you do it by going to not quite mount, by giving the guy a little bit of what he thinks is control. The other great thing about, like, in a mount, the guy can buck and bridge, and that, no matter how high level you get, that does continue to be an issue. If you give him the 3/4 mount instead, and he's got his knees and he's got his legs pinched around your foot and he's on his side, he can't bridge without giving up your leg and going flat onto his back. So the illusion of having some way back to guard keeps him in like a less athletic position while you punch him in the head. Because as striking goes, it's as good as mount. The other thing I thought was brilliant in this fight was Bryce Mitchell's knees in the clinch. Really underrated. I myself underrated it. Because he's in the clinch with Luna, he's trying to get him down, and Luna's going, no, I'm a very strong wrestler. And so he just goes, okay, I'm kneeing in the body. And then he lands about 10 unanswered, and it's clearly really upsetting Luna. And then he locks his hands and gets his double. Ended up on the bottom, and he threw up a triangle to get back up. He did some cool stuff with the meat hook in round 3, which is a rubber guard position. But it's a rubber guard position that even someone like Mikey Musumeci uses. Carlos Condit used to do it a lot from the bottom. It's the part of rubber guard that works and doesn't destroy your knees. You'll see a few guys use meat hook, getting your foot over their back and then into the crook of your bicep and then your hand into their... Do you know what? Just look it up. It's fucking stupid to describe. Most rubber guard is. Oh, and then there was a really good bit where Luna got on top in the 3rd round, and Bryce Mitchell, we talk about this all the time from half guard, bottom knee. Got his bottom knee into the hip joint, got Luna's weight off him just long enough that he could kick up into an underhook from half guard. And then the thing with the underhook is, like, it's hard to do much if you can't get up onto your elbow and your hand. So guys will chop out that hand to stop you getting up. But if you can reach out on the bottom and grab the other guy's foot down by the toes, he's fucked. That grip is so strong. So what it did was it enabled Bryce Mitchell to come up into what Eddie Bravo used to call the old school sweep. But if you watch Craig Jones's career, he plays from Z-guard the whole time. And if the guy's foot ever comes close enough that he can grab it, not like literally grabbing the toe, but grabbing around the toes, so the real end of the foot, the guy can't sprawl out of it without hurting his knee. And Craig Jones can start entering underhooks. He can start entering leg attacks because it's such a disadvantageous position for the top guy. And guys let you have it all the time just because their foot gets too close while they're busy trying to do other stuff. So what's next for the winner? Bryce Mitchell at bantamweight. What are we talking about? The thing is that he came down from featherweight because there were some bangers up there and he was getting banged out. But there's quite a lot of bangers at bantamweight. I saw someone say Raul Rosas. I think that's a really interesting fight, given that I just watched him put some grappling on a strong wrestler. Obviously, you got ancient Raoni Barcelos in the top 15. I would say maybe someone like Farid Basharat, who's number 15 right now, because Farid Basharat is a very clean technical striker, but he's not a hitter. And he's a good defensive grappler, but is he unsubmittable? He's undefeated as well. He's 15-0, so that would be a great name for Bryce Mitchell to have. Deiveson Figueiredo is currently in the position of washed old man. Hits really hard, but doesn't do it very often. And honestly, I could see Bryce Mitchell doing what he did to Edson Barbosa, just like getting in his face, punching lots and then ducking into clinches and tiring Deiveson Figueiredo out like that and then finishing him on the ground. Particularly if he stands next to the fence the whole fight like he did against Yudong and against Umar. I would steer him the hell clear of guys like David Martinez, Peyton Talbot, all these guys who can defend a takedown decently and crack. Vinicius Oliveira is an interesting one because he's ranked at number 12, but stops a good takedown, but gets quite tired in the later going. And isn't the most accurate guy in the world either. Or a high volume guy. Oh, and Chito Vera is also washed and just riding his way out of the rankings. Yeah, that would be a good one. Maybe he would knock out Bryce Mitchell, I don't know, but at least Bryce Mitchell can bring some pace, which Chito Vera is allergic to. And then when you get into like the top 10 end, well, I mean, Figgy's 9 and Marlon Vera's 10. So there's always these guys in the rankings who just shouldn't be there anymore. But when you get higher than that, you're talking like Mario Batista, hard ask. Zahabi, everyone looks at Zahabi like he's just not supposed to be there, but he's done pretty well lately. Song Yudong, Sanhagen, O'Malley, Umar, Marab, Yan, Murderer's Row. Probably not for Bryce Mitchell. But there's a few guys in that top 15. Certainly the 15 to 10 range. Actually, 15 up to 9, where Deiveson Figueiredo is. I would say that he could beat a good number of those guys. On a good night. As long as he doesn't run face first onto a hellacious punch. And for Luna, I don't think you even need to worry. Take a break. Just go back to fighting lower level opponents and looking amazing. He's like 22 or something, isn't he? He's 21. I was being facetious when I said 22, and he's even younger than that. Alessandro Costa knocked out Matt Schnell. I mean, Matt Schnell's just retired now, but it was at the point where we just get to watch him get knocked out constantly without getting cut because he publicly defended UFC fighter pay. I don't think anyone learned anything from that fight. Marcus McGhee versus Yannis. This actually, I was surprised by Yannis in the middle round. McGhee did seem to be trying some shit. He seemed to be like playing with some stuff. So it was all spin kicks in the first round, and in the last round it was all hop up taekwondo. Maybe he got a taekwondo coach because he was just doing taekwondo for 2 of the rounds of this fight. Middle round he was boxing a bit more. Very good southpaw boxer. Very right hand heavy, which kind of annoyed me because Josh Yannis is southpaw full time. And he was reaching with his lead hand constantly for McGee's rear hand when he was southpaw. And I'm just going, use your left hand to check his jab and then fire your jab, which is quite good. And the other thing was, this was one of those fights where I went and I'm looking at it going, why aren't you low kicking? Why aren't you throwing any low kicks? And then I look at the stats afterwards and he threw like 8 low kicks and landed 8 low kicks. So they were there. Yannis could have thrown some low kicks, but he didn't. Because McGhee was standing like almost side on at several points in this fight because clearly he's been working on his taekwondo for some reason. But clean 2-1 for McGhee, so fair enough. What's next for McGhee? Back into serious contenders. What's next for Yannis? I don't know. Edgar Chairez versus Bruno Silva. Do you know what? I did like Bruno Silva in this fight. He was landing the classic Roberto Duran outside slip right hand. And he was doing it off a jab and dip too. So I was losing my mind because I'd been saying on the previous show how stupid Bruno Silva's striking often was, where he's like winging these uppercuts and trying to run past people. But he's throwing his jab and then he drops down, head off to the right, jab goes past his left ear, and then he comes back over the top with the right straight of his own. just like Roberto Duran did all the time. You know, the famous knockdown of Iran Barkley being the obvious example. That was beautiful. He was having a lot of trouble with Chairez's jab, though. And then in the last exchange, he like level changed to hit the body with the left hook, but he sort of realized he wasn't going to get close enough and like half-assedly went through with the action anyway. And Chairez hit him with an uppercut because he slowed right down while he was doing it. He was like he's having second thoughts about it. And Chairez hit him with an uppercut, knocked him down, got on the back, got the rear naked choke. But honestly, like an improvement in Bruno Silva on what I've seen. So good for him. Didn't realize he was ranked at 15. Edgar Chairez has been around for ages, always puts on a good fight. Don't know what's next for either of them. But now we're getting into like the unimportant portion of the card, so I don't really have to. Anything else? Chelsea Chandler submitted Cachoeira, who is dreadful. The Souza versus Carnellosi fight was really strange because Carnellosi, like Souza did fight with her back on the fence the entire time from the first exchange, and then eventually came off and she threw overhand, jab, jab, overhand. So overhand into double jab, overhand. And it worked beautifully. I do always love big right uppercut into jab, big right overhand into jab, because the jab always connects afterwards. If the guy's just covering up, you just hit his guard and then poke him afterwards, and the jab always works. And then she head kicked her on the way up, which is brutal. Those ones are always so harsh, because obviously the other guy is always reeling. So he doesn't have time to go like, am I legally going to get kicked in the head here? Am I not? And they just get bashed on the way up, as close to a soccer kick as you can legally do. Anything else? Brito versus Levitt. This one was pretty much what I expect. I did like what Levitt was doing. You know, the physicality of Brito is a lot to deal with. There was some interesting stuff with the pinch headlock from the bottom in the early going when Levitt tried to get him down, ended up on the bottom, had the pinch headlock from, I think, butterfly guard, and then he used it to try and get a sort of over the head guillotine grip. Which we talk about a lot because like getting guillotines from flat on your back is almost impossible, as Alexa Grasso showed in 25 minutes of her fight with Shevchenko last time. But there are clever ways to like threaten sitting up, get the guy to push into you, bury his head under your armpit. And one of the recent ones that I've been looking at is Joseph Chen does this from the pinch headlock. He'll just go straight to he'll swing his other arm over the head and grab the front headlock. So that was quite interesting. The arming guillotine was so legitimate that Brito flopped to his side and ended up getting reversed. Brito got up along the fence and then he got the double unders and pushed off the old Mark Hunt special. Dig your double unders, bury your head against their chin, and then act like they're helping you take your jacket off. You put your butt back and you just suck your arms out like... I did like the little fake switch kick that Brito did. He stepped up to like throw a left kick and then just started swinging instead, and that really did catch Levitt off guard. It looked like Levitt changed levels, and the way that Brito got this, I think this is his second ninja choke in the UFC, or maybe third. He got JSP with it after being like, "Let me up, bitch, let me up," and JSP like gave him a little space to say, "Get up on your own, bitch," and then he got up and immediately choked him after I think it was like 2.5 rounds he was losing. But the ninja choke is so legitimate because once it's in, there's just, I mean, the other guy instinctively is going to be like, finish the double, finish whatever I'm doing, and you just get choked more. But it's very hard to properly do. A lot of the time you'll see, a lot of the guys you see use it the most are not finishing it because it's like they're threatening it so that the guy goes, oh, fuck, and moves their head and gives them an underhook or something like that. But the way he got this, like, Levitt level changed and there was a thud because Brito like punched him in the throat with his wrist and then snapped up the guillotine or the ninja choke. So that was, yeah, super cool. We've gone long today, so I won't bother doing like what's next for either of those guys, but it was a fun fight. I pretty much expected that one to be fun. What's next? Well, next weekend we've got UFC Pep Rally for the President, which has only 7 fights on, and some of them are good. Just the whole... since November last year, the fights have been largely just terrible. Like the booking has been dreadful. And it was, they're stacking the White House, guys. It's going to be like UFC 300. They're stacking the White House. And then the White House is announced and everyone goes, oh, I was hoping for better. And then you look at it again and it's only 7 fights. They never announced anymore. But we'll be talking about it anyway. You know, there's some fun stuff that could happen there. And then today I'm finishing up an article on 1966 Fight of the Year. So 60 years today, 60 years in a week, I think it'll be. Jose Chairez, notable for being the other Peek-a-boo boxer trained by Cus D'amato. It's Floyd Patterson, Mike Tyson, and Jose Torre. And Torre was the thing about D'Amato's fighters was that they were all like undersized, except Tyson. I mean, he was short, but he was big. But Floyd Patterson was a middleweight who went up to heavyweight because Cus D'Amato was like, the heavyweight title of the world is the one that matters. And then Jose Torre was a guy who was a middleweight and won his belt at light heavyweight for some reason. For various political reasons. But we'll get into that in the article. But this fight was, Eddie Cotton was a 40-year-old, which was unheard of. If you were 40 and a woman, you had like pink rollers in your hair all the time and those massive glasses. But if you were 40 in 1966, you were not an athlete. That was impossible. So Eddie Cotton was a 40-year-old guy who had been ducked by a lot of legitimate fighters. And but partly because he had the dual thing going where he was 1, black, 2, good, 3, boring. Because boring is always a legitimate excuse to duck someone. It's the nice intersection of this being a sport and a form of entertainment. You can always be like, why would I fight him? If he wins, well, we'll have a really boring world champion. And the press will go, that's dreadfully unfair. This is supposed to be a meritocracy. And the fans will go, you're probably right. But Eddie Cotton gets this title fight against Jose Torre, and he puts on a blinder, fights the fight of his life. And it's a beautiful matchup between Torre's peekaboo boxing in like the traditional trained by Cus D'Amato sense, and Eddie Cotton's smooth shoulder rolling sort of style. And especially the infight is so good. I mean, I'm writing this whole article about it for the Patreon boys, but the infight is spectacular because Torre wants to put his head against Cotton and fight square on and open up with both hands. And Cotton wants to stay bladed, keep the weight of Torre on his lead shoulder, and then work with his rear hand. And anytime he wants to throw his lead hand, he's got to get the weight off his lead hand, free it up, and throw like a short left uppercut and jack Torre's head back like that. So yeah, it's a really fun fight, and I'm really enjoying writing about that. So if you want to read about that, get on the Patreon. Loads of GIFs coming, lots of arrows and diagrams and shit like that. And probably an audio track by me, because I've started it with plenty of time to do. And then, of course, on the preview podcast this week, we'll be talking about how Gaethje could beat Topuria or whatever the other title fight is. So sign up to the Patreon, get in on all the extra shit and support the podcast. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and I'll see you when I see you. More people should be breaking Priscilla Cachoeira's arm in every fight. Bless.